Hello, good afternoon to you all. I am Jean-Xavier Arnaud from the PR firm TILDER, and I will be hosting this roundtable entitled Toward Common Values. As you well know by now, values are at the heart of this FD Day. But when we think about Europe and values, we need to ask ourselves what is the common ground on which we can build a better future, and in the end, what are our common values? To discuss this topic, we welcome for this next half hour Cécile Barato from Cdiscount, Marie Ekeland from 2050, yeah, and Clark Parsons from the Internet Economy Foundation.
Bonjour.
And to open the discussion, I would like to ask to you all a quite open question, which would be, for you, what would be, from your window, our European common values today? Cécile, I'll leave it to you first.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting us. I would say that as a European tech company, we think that values for European tech should be responsibility towards our ecosystem, environment, and users mainly. But it's also openness and solidarity. I think it's a way to define the values for European tech.
Marie?
Yeah, it's funny because when I started Daphne a while ago, part of the statement that we were making is that we would invest in startups that had a European DNA. So we really thought about what was different between Europe, for example, and in the US. And the three things we came up with were that in Europe we were thinking, and that will come to your point, which is we were thinking in a for everybody, so there was a sense of collectivity instead of the idea of tech being at the service of a society and not at the service of one particular person. And whereas the United States are really around empowerment and not really about how can tech make a society work all together. The other one was how can we really think about quality of life? You know, and there was a lot because of our kind of history in the food industry, in the work-life balance that was super important in Europe, and versus the US was very much around more productivity with a lot of tools to help you work better, to help you. So that was the other counterpart we were making. And the last one was creativity, in the sense that we have a lot of creative industries like fashion, luxury, and this kind of craftsmanship, you know, that we had of thinking how there's still this way of being around human creation as well, versus the US, who were really much around this kind of entertainment thing, right? Broadcasting, Netflix, all these type of companies. But the thing, if I just cannot end up on this, is that one thing I have realized throughout this experience of Daphne, of trying to have this framework of understanding startups, but also within each startups, is that actually words do not mean the same thing for everybody. Is that, for example, openness will mean something for you and something different for me, and that the truly important thing is to actually say what's beneath these words in terms of concretely what we're doing and where we're going.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's a real pleasure. I agree with Marie. We were actually just talking. I mean, the word values, working at the IEF, I actually always think back right now for this debate to Milton Friedman, who, you know, pretty much the law that everyone follows in the US in the corporate world is the purpose of a corporation is to maximize shareholder value. Period. That's the philosophy. That's a philosophy that many Americans still aspire to. Of course, we've had a couple decades now of Davos and stakeholder values and this a sort of competing philosophy saying, well, a corporation's not just there to make its owners wealthy. Every quarter, it's there also to serve a good in society. But as you've seen, it's been very hard to define that, quantify it, measure it, or hold anyone to it. Because every quarter we look and see that Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft had another 68% growth quarter, and the earth is in worse shape, and journalism is dying, and you know. So we've seen rampant capitalism and shareholder value clearly has got us into a pickle with the shape of our planet and also the tech ecosystem, which hopefully we'll get into. What I love about the European way is this cooperation. That's at the heart of the European Union. 27 nations finding a way to work together, compromise. I love the social contract. I live in Germany where every corporation, has board seats for labor and really cares about all of the stakeholders. So I think this is something that Europe can really pioneer. And Marie and I were just talking about, hopefully we'll get deeper into it in a minute, some of the different ways we could look at corporate legal structures to put different goals in place for what our corporations and what our society could achieve on the back of technology. But Europe really has a chance to lead here, and it's exciting to be a part of a debate like this because they don't have debates like this in the US.
Thank you all. Clark, I would like to go on with you on one point we discussed together preparing this debate about European policy and more precisely about the regulatory framework we are building. Do you think, and do you think all, of course, if you want to answer, but do you think that we are today, 27, able to build a regulatory framework that is mirroring our values?
I think so. I think Europe is on the way. Europe has forgotten some of its great success stories just a few decades ago. The telecoms industry, to me, is a fabulous success story for what Europe can achieve. You turned a continent full of monopolists into a continent of really great competition by enforcing competition. You deregulated, but you put strict rules in place. You had, if you know your telecom buzzwords, local loop unbundling. You had competition at the service level. You declared an essential utility at the wholesale level. And of course, people are saying, let's do that with the Google index right now. So these debates are coming back. I think Europe has an incredible role to play. Those of us who deal with Brussels know that there's battles every day with an alphabet soup of new regulations, Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, AI regulation, Data Governance Act. Maybe it'll be overregulated for a while, but I think it's fantastic that Europe is trying to put some rules in place because obviously the US attitude of just laissez-faire, let the market do what it should do, has gotten us now to a point of just rampant monopolists and market dominance. And so we all know that we have to bring the European values of fair competition into play.
If I can build up on what Clark just said, there's been a great book called The Great Reversal by Thomas Philippon, which was a French economist based in New York, who really has digged into competition both in Europe and in the US in the different industries. And what he shows is that in the last 20 years, there's been massive concentration in the US market and really enforcement of antitrust rules within Europe. And this has, as an outcome, brought the US, in his studies, he shows how much a US medium household, because of monopolies, has a higher cost of $300 per month compared to European medium household, because monopolies are bringing price higher in the US, whereas Europe has brought price lowers thanks to competition. And the other aspect of that is that not only it's a problem in terms for the consumers, but also all these giant firms, so in telecom, it's been the same thing in the healthcare business, but also for everything around aerospatial, planes. And the interesting part is that these firms are not investing. So they're giving back all the money to shareholders, but in terms of its investing amount compared to our European peers, they're really lower. And so I think regulation, this is why I'm saying this, that if we think it in the right way, it can also be a competitive edge for European economy. It's not only about constraints. If we do it well, it's really a factor of increasing innovation, of more fairness in the shareholder breakdown, in the breakdown of value, of financial value, but also of, as you were saying, how can we put the rest of our values within regulation. But it can be a competitive advantage from a financial perspective as well.
Can I throw a fun fact on that? Because it's
Go on,
brilliant to
Clark.
say that. We did a study a couple of years ago. The average European, rather the average American, pays twice as much for high-speed broadband access, gets half the bandwidth that a European gets, and most Americans have maybe a choice of 2 providers in their market. So all across Europe, Europeans have 3 to 4 providers to choose from, better prices and better broadband, and that's just because of the competition that was enforced by regulation.
Maybe if I may, as Marie say, I think we look as a tech actor with very much attention to what's going on in Brussels, of course, and we think that this new regulation can improve the market, but we also think that we should be careful because we've seen already multiple times that policymakers tend to tailor-make the regulations according to what the giants can do. They need to be very careful and to go towards very proportionate legislation. If not, they're going to build some new barriers to entry. And this is going to be detrimental for tech companies, but also for users, because they won't have much choice if we kill the alternatives. We think it's a very important point to raise. And you said, Marie, that you need to be very clear about what you say when you talk about values and what you put behind them. And we think it's true, and that European tech players can make a difference by showing an example. And in that regard, it's very important for European policymakers to look at what European tech are doing and to listen to them. And for many, many years, European players were not really heard in Brussels just because they didn't have the means to be present in Brussels. And we think that today it's quite changing. We have some new alliances, and European players are now talking with policymakers in Brussels, and we see they are listening. But we also see there are temptation in Parliament, in Council, to go further. We see, for example, that there are some amendments trying to make the threshold higher for DMA for designating the gatekeepers. We see it's a very big danger because we think that this regulation will miss its target if it goes that way. We see that there are ideas to strengthen the DSA. I think it's very interesting. The dialogue is very interesting in this matter, but by trying to make the digital market very, very safe, we see the risk that many players won't be able to achieve these new standards, and we think it's a thing that policymakers should keep in mind.
I would like to come back to something I noticed in your discussions. Talking about European values, we've been talking as much about Europe than about the US. So my question about US values, which we have been discussing here in France for very different reasons from let's say 1 week, do you think that it's today a reasonable ambition to try to have common values between Europe and the US, or is it unrealistic today?
As the American, I get this question. I've been in Berlin 24 years, so you could ask me as a German. Yeah, common values. Look, we let China into the World Trade Organization hoping they would somehow join start to reflect our values. There's a debate in the German campaign right now about, can I trade with someone who doesn't share my values? And one of the leading candidates answered, well, if we box, do we just box ourselves off? We're trying to solve a climate crisis, which is worldwide. Do we just not talk to China, who yesterday announced they're not going to build any more coal power plants outside of China, which is quite a statement. So Look, I live in Germany, which has a different defense posture than France. France joined NATO late. Germany was very thrilled to get under the umbrella of the US and has stayed there nested for 70 years. And I think you'll find Germany and France, no matter who gets elected, having some tension in the next couple months about NATO and defense, even though Ursula von der Leyen now wants to do sorry, we're getting off track, but I think we still share some very bedrock values about freedom, about fair and open markets. You have to just remember, as we have been discussing, the US has let its tech ecosystem and its monopolies run rampant for about 40 years. But I don't know if you've been noticing in Washington for the last year, there's been a gigantic correction taking place in American thinking. The woman in charge of the Federal Trade Commission has appointed a very strong anti-monopoly team, and I think they're going to make Europe look slow very soon in terms of how much they're doing against Silicon Valley and against monopoly power. So I think, to answer your question, I think we still share, obviously, 99% of the same values, but we are, competitors in the marketplace, and that's always going to cause problems.
If I can take a different angle, I was saying in the first place that we actually need to be precise about what value means, but that also values are something very generic. What we actually want is a vision of the society we want to build in the future. And regulation has to be at the service of a vision and of this kind of strategy as well. And if I try to look at what are the kind of visions that are projected in the US, in China, in Europe, or in Africa about what is the type of society that we're projecting for 2050, well, it's not clear at all. We don't have a master plan that is common. So we're not going the same direction because we don't even know the direction we're going, basically. So I tried to have some hints about what, as an investment firm, when we're investing, we're crafting the future. So the question is, what is the society we want to contribute to? And so I try to get inspiration. The inspiration I got is from science fiction books from different cultures, right? To try to see what were the different culture projecting in the future in their novels, in their science fiction novels. And it's very interesting how you get different imaginaries, and they're really not going in the same place. So I don't want to take the rest of the time to tell you what I've learned, but what I think is one of the key questions we will have to solve if we want to build a common framework, which has to be global, as you were saying, because climate change is going to hurt everybody on the planet, and some more than others. What are the rest of the world going to do? I mean, we have to solve this problem together. So if we want to do that, we will have to try to build the type of minimum vision that is bringing us together and that can hold a common international rules.
Maybe if I may take a more down-to-earth approach, I think that when you ask the question about can we have the same values, talking from a European tech actor, the question would maybe be, can Europe enforce its own values on its own territory? And for us, the question is, okay, the European Union is claiming some values, is building some new regulation, DSA, DMA, but they already did it with the GDPR. They set a very important example. Now the question is, are all actors playing by the same rules only in Europe? Before thinking about exporting our model, which would be great, can we be sure that our model has a real existence here in Europe? And we saw with GDPR that, of course, the main principles are given in Europe, but when you come into the details, you can see that this regulation has allowed for forum shopping, that it's not always applied the same way, depending on the states, because all DPAs, all data protection authorities don't have the same interpretation of the regulation. So the question is, can we all play by the same rules in Europe? I think it's, before talking about merging values with other parts of the world, can we all have the same values in Europe?
Can I build on something Cécile said? Because I think it was really important, the point you made about Brussels potentially over-regulating with good intentions. This is actually why I love coming to Paris for France Digitale Day, because you guys spend most of your time talking about how to grow companies and how to make a strong ecosystem, and not all of the time thinking about how to regulate. It's very important, you know, the Internet Economy Foundation, we were built to try and help Europe get a digital ecosystem going or make the right steps. Very quickly you realized when a company like Cdiscount or others start scaling, they bump up against major players, usually from Silicon Valley, and suddenly we're talking about competition and regulation. But the way to compete, or rather the way to impose our values on the rest of the world, is to start to flex our own muscles. A couple of facts. Europe has 1.8% of the holdings of the top 30 internet companies and 1.4% of the board seats. In other words, at the hyperscaler level right now of the global tech economy, Europe is nowhere. It's just weak. It's been, we Europeans believed all that free trade talk and let Google roll through our market. So the way to fight it is not just to regulate in Brussels. I couldn't agree more. We have to focus so much, and this is why Germans look jealously to France and the Scale Up Europe project and what President Macron has been doing, trying to do everything you can to build an ecosystem to put your own capital and your own talent and your own innovations coming out of your own research institutes and universities all together to go hit the world market. And that's really, to me, the path to because if you're 1.4%, you can talk all day about your values, no one's listening.
Thank you very much. I would have 1,000 more questions to ask to you, but I'm firmly told that we are running out of time. So thank you very much. Thank you, Clark. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Cécile.